So just before we start, we're going to go types of communication, that bit, yeah?
Yep.
And then what do you want to do?
Then
do you want to...
your question?
Excellent, because I think they're going to be awesome. Good. Right, let me just put the recording on because it's paused. Okay, right, we're back. Good. Okay, so obviously throughout your time, you've become an expert in communication, and you've used lots, and this is part of the research, the changes to research and the changes to the intellectual climate, and also just the way that technologies have shifted, and the way we do things now has shifted. So we're talking about types of communication now that you've used, both stuff, but also the lectures, conversations, and all that kind of thing. Also, you've also written books, but you've also made films, and you've also done lots of recordings, including this. So do you want to talk about the impact of all this and how in your time you've seen these things shift, and which are the ones that have been very significant for you, which are the types of communication that have been, if you like, very important for you? And then I guess I'd be interested to see how you assess what difference this makes to your discipline as an anthropologist and a historian, and as a general thinker.
Well, as you've suggested, I divide communications into three kinds. Why it is that I'm interested in this is I don't know. And in some ways, I'm not a great natural communicator, in the sense that I was quite a shy little boy, and I'm less interested in stopping in the pathways of load and chatting to the local people than Sarah. She in daily life, particularly with people we meet, is a better communicator than I am. But for one reason or other, I like communicating, and I think it's partly because I've realized that you can't separate, just as you can't separate life from work, you can't separate communication from understanding, that the way we as human beings learn about the world is not only or mainly by observing, but by communicating with other human beings. And in order to do that, you have to master various forms of communication, or at least be involved with them. And so for me, every kind of communication, like writing or oral communications or film, is not communicating what I know, but it is about exploring what I don't know and sharing my lack of knowledge with the other person, and then learning from them. And so starting with the oral, a number of books about Cambridge are very striking in saying that the important thing about Cambridge is talking. People like Virginia Woolf and the Bloomsbury group around her, they just spent their time talking. And high table life and college life revolves about conversation with your students and conversation with your colleagues. And what you learn is that each of us have a very small knowledge base and a small set of understandings. And if we are fortunate to be surrounded by interesting, intelligent, and engaging people, by talking to them, you broaden your knowledge and experience hugely. So conversation, starting with informal conversation. I mean, many of the people I interviewed said, I didn't learn anything from my lectures or from my books or anything. It was chatting to Eric Hobsbawm or, the people I was at, my friends. It was from my friends that I learned. And that was, over a pint of beer or, whatever, on a walk. So that kind of informal communication is incredibly important. And I've loved, above all, walks I've gone with Sarah and with Jerry Martin and with Michael Bryant and other of our friends in different parts of this country. And the long conversations I've had with people in other cultures, particularly in Japan with Kenichi and Toshiko, but with my friend Zilan Wang and my Chinese, these conversations, there's nothing nicer to anticipate than, come and have a cup of tea and let's have a talk. And, you very often come away enriched by that. So when I organize conferences, for example, any conference runner knows that the important thing is not the set papers, but the times between the papers when you go off and have a drink at the bar, and then you suddenly discover.
That's what's been lost, actually, isn't it? During the COVID lockdowns, that we've had all these conferences online, but actually they're rubbish, really, because you're not getting the other stuff.
That's absolutely true. They're rubbish, in both because you don't have the conversations and you don't make the personal ties with people.
No.
But there has been this alternative that the one-to-one conversations in emails and Zoom, things like with you now, have partly made up for it, but not entirely. So basically, informal conversations, incredibly important. Basically, anthropology, that is what anthropology is. I mean, if you ask what the method of an anthropologist is, it's gossip. It's sitting with someone in another culture and chatting to them. And you can steer it or you can absorb it. So the art of conversation is incredibly important.
Now, you're quite skillful at this, and again, given what you've said about your education and stuff, you can see where these skills have come from. It's partly from your education, the way you've been brought up. Are there places where chatting, gossip, and that sort of thing are not as easy to get off the ground? I mean, I imagine that aren't there cultures where it's not the done thing, perhaps, to sit down and have a gossip with people?
Oh, most. I mean, not most, but many.
Yeah.
Particularly, obviously, the gender divide. I mean, in more than half the world's populations, a man couldn't go up and chat to a woman. No way. Even in the presence of her family, it would be difficult. And in many parts of the hypersensitive West, it's impossible for an old person. I mean, I can't go up in the supermarket and chat to a child. I mean, I can wave and smile, but if I engage that child in more than a minute's conversation,
yeah. Absolutely.
So basically, there are plenty of situations where it's not possible to chat or appropriate, but it is the way you learn most of what you learn about life. But then there are the more formal kinds, and supervisions at Oxford and Cambridge, 1-to-1, 1-to-2, which are unique to those universities, are the wonders that they are, because they're basically institutionalized conversations. If it works well, there are some people who don't realize that and think it's just a matter of setting an essay and then getting them to read it, and then you say it's good or bad, and then you leave. But if it's a conversation, which it should be, and conversations with your PhD students when you're supervising them, you don't tell them what to write or anything, but you talk to them about it and they can explain things, and then so it goes on. So conversation becomes a little more formal and oral. Once you get into more formal, like a seminar is a sort of very difficult art form, I found, because there are always shy people and people who don't want to contribute and so on and so on. And drawing them out is difficult. But a good seminar is a good conversation too, because you get crosstalk and so on. And then finally, the oral presentation of a lecture. And lecturing, I may have said, I increasingly enjoyed lecturing. At the beginning, I sort of got a buzz out of it. Even my first lectures at Cambridge, I enjoyed, because people came up and said, I really enjoyed that. And you got good feedback. And anyone knows, you can tell if the lecture is working. There is a chemistry, and a lot of my friends get worse and worse at lecturing because the chemistry is not very good. Therefore, what they start to do is to close off the chemistry. In other words, they never get engaged. They never look at the audience. And as a
You
result,
kind of perform, don't you? I mean, I've seen you on some of the videos online, and you perform, and especially, I mean, the one that struck me was the Gellner one, where you actually become Ernest Gellner. You impersonate. You say, "I'll do this as if I am," and that's very. I don't know whether that's a usual thing in in Cambridge, but it was certainly very interesting to watch that, and it was highly engaging. You know, I was thinking, yeah, that's kind of
that's just stumping in.
yeah.
Yes, I mean, Sarah would tell you I like performing in front of
Yeah.
people. I mean, I put it down to playing the guitar when I was young, and I had to be Elvis Presley. And, you know, there's no point in singing an Elvis Presley or a Bob Dylan song if you don't actually perform Elvis Presley. So it got over my shyness in performing in front of people. But also, this was a very important feature of British upper middle class education, teaching you to perform, not only in plays and singing and so on, but actually, you know, from the Dragon School onwards, we would have debates and you would perform. And my first realization that maybe I was quite good at it was when at Sedma in my last year, we had a mock politics debater. And I was chosen to be the Conservative candidate. Now, it was a rollover in a school like that. I mean, you know, they're all going to vote Conservative anyway, but I won by more than I might have done because I became a Conservative politician. I dressed up like one, and I sort of affected the Alec Douglas home sort of approach, and they loved it. I mean, I made them feel warm about the Conservatives.
So are you this generation of Monty Python and that lot, or are you slightly
I'm younger
before them?
than that. That's half a generation below me. They're sort of 15, 20 years young. I'm the generation that enjoyed.
Yeah, because again,
so
yeah, because I was just thinking about when, yeah, I was just thinking about the way that they seem to be upper middle class guys mainly, and they loved this performative stuff, and they would play around with stuff, and take the mickey out of politicians and so on. And it sounds as if you've got that same sort of enjoyment of this.
Well, it was something that was of my generation and theirs. For example, at my boarding school at the Sedbergh, and even at the Dragon, at the end of term, you would do what anthropologists call is sort of a world turned upside down. In other words, you would have skits about the masters and you would satirize them. And through the term, you'd be beaten for that. But then there was a license moment when you could just send them up.
This is carnival, was it? This
yeah,
kind of
the carnival, Charivari carnival. They loved it. And this was built into public school education, that serious things should be subverted from time to time, and that actually reinforces them. So I learned that, and I also should mention my grandmother, because she was a great dramatist. I mean, she loved performing in all sorts of ways, singing and acting, but in daily life, you know, when she told a story, it wasn't just a story, it was all the acting of the story as well. So I learned that sort of pleasure, that it's not the story you tell, it's the way you tell it that's important. So lecturing I really enjoyed from early on. And the thing I discovered, as in the other forms of oral communication, is that it's not telling people what you know already. The pleasure about conversations, you don't know, it's a game, you don't know where, as with our interviews, you don't know where it's going to go. So you throw something in and then they surprise you with something, you know, to the reverse or whatever, and send you in a new direction. So both a lecture should be like that. I mean, the best lectures, like Ernest, had no real preparation. They just talked about what interested them. And Tony Giddens was another example of a very good lecturer who just talked about what interested him. Keith Hart, in his interview, explains how when he first lectured, he's an extreme, but when he first lectured, he prepared it all and more or less read it out. And then he got to a point where he just had the headings and looked at those occasionally. He then got to a point where he would spend an hour or so before, like Keith Hopkins, who was another very good lecturer, thinking about it. But he finally got to the point, which he really was delighted in, was that he didn't even think about it. And as he entered the lecture room, he would say to them, "What am I lecturing on today?" And they would say so and so, and then he would talk. But it required huge concentration and a deep well of knowledge, so that if a student came in late to his lectures, he would get furious because it broke, and he would send them out, because it was a performance that mustn't be interrupted like a play. So lecturing taught me as much as it taught them, I hope.